Ram, this is what happens when you don't wear yours.
What's that about me?
Very diplomatic.
Yeah.
They're all great.
Competition between you two.
Yeah, we are live on YouTube where we can have our headband discussion later. They're all great. Yeah, thanks. Who was that? Somebody from Greece said they're all great. I don't know, Faye from Greece. I'm gonna advocate for my headband, which has flowers.
I'm gonna let you have your fun, Magda.
Yeah, thanks. I knew something. Okay, we are now on the right time, 10:30 Chicago time. So I'm going to vanish into the background and I'm going to let Ram take over for today's session with Hari. But before I go, just one more little reminder. Awake, Aware, Arise is our annual conference. And now it has a theme and a website, awakeawarearise.com. And it'll be 3 sessions every day for 5 weeks. We will have, as Meenakshi likes to call it, follow the sun schedule, so that everyone on the planet should be awake for at least 2 sessions each day. But it's a free event, so please register, please attend and support our amazing speakers. Please come and be inspired and take the things that you learn back to your workplaces and communities and families and the world. And please share with your coworkers, etc., on social networks. We really appreciate your support. And email us if you have any questions or put them in the chat. I'll be around for that. Ram, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, hi. Welcome to all of you. I'm the one without the headband. The other two are in competition with their different headbands today. So yeah, I'm a bit of a losing in at the moment. So let me, it's tremendously, it's a great pleasure for me to welcome Hari into this program. At one level, purely in terms of his qualifications and what he does, he's a physiotherapist by training. He's currently in Toronto working in a couple of hospitals, soon to be a Canadian citizen. He, in addition, has got a master's degree in psychology. He's an MBA, and he's also a PCC coach. Hari and I, we met probably about 8-9 years ago. At that point in time, we were both in certain states of low energy levels. I, because of the severe chronic back pain issue, which used to lay me down, and I was practically not able to move, immobile. And he came to treat me, and it turned out that he was in a state of emotional low at that point in time. So it sort of became a relationship of his helping me to a state today that, to a very, very large extent because of him, I'm able to function more or less normally without having to worry anytime what is going to happen at the next moment. And over a period of time, Hari got close to us, my family, myself and our children. He used to live with us, and finally he migrated to Canada, and he's been there for the last about 3+ years. He's an amazingly great healer. And one of the things that we keep talking about, because we have weekly calls pretty much on a regular basis, and some of his experiences, and in his profession, at his work, he practices coaching in multiple ways. He practices coaching as a caregiver with his patients, and he's also training his peers and others into a coaching approach to work with people. And even those who are actually patients who are recovering and in rehabilitation, got through and they are functioning now, he works with them to help them to become kind of coach mentors for those who are still in need of treatment. So one of the areas that we would like to talk to him about today is about that. How does he take the coaching approach to the health medical field, towards his vision, as I understand him well, is about relieving pain. That's his major area of work and research in future, chronic pain management with a mind-body connection, mind-body energy connection. The second is, briefly to start with, I would like him to talk a little bit about his own journey, a hero's journey, as it were, because I know that he did not plan to be a physiotherapist, and it happened in multiple ways, and how he developed this vision. And it reached to a point where he was able to visualize and create his own future, as it were, which is a program that we are planning to run from next week. He's a classic example of that power of that kind of a process. And finally, a bit of in terms of the ethical dilemmas that happen when you are trying to apply professional ethics in ways that may interfere and sometimes misalign with personal values and needs. So these are three areas that we have in mind, depending upon the time, depending upon how we sort of progress in terms of questions that may be asked. So Hari, let me start with this. Knowing that it wasn't your first choice and you wanted to be other things, I don't want to tell the audience what you wanted to be at that point in time. You can if you wish. So you eventually became a physiotherapist and what you're today. So it's like Joseph Campbell's, you are very familiar with that. We have talked about it many times in terms of the man with 1,000 faces, the hero's journey. What is it that took you from what you were to where you are today, that hero's journey?
First of all, thank you, Ram and Coach Sharia, for having me here today. It's an honor. It's an absolute honor and pleasure to be here sharing this screen. And thank you for everyone else who's joined from across the world. It's literally has been a transformative journey, as you're mentioning, about 8-9 years, like I would say about 10 years since I started work. The hero's journey, that's a powerful question for me to reflect on. Long and short of it, being mindful of the time, long and short of it is probably the resolution that I had at some time where my inner world and the outer world, the external actually collided and actually merged. So to start off with, I never really had an idea what physiotherapy is or what it would lead to. It was a way of getting a professional degree and being on my own to gain that independence, to start from there. But once I started work, and I was in Bangalore, like I started my work in Bangalore, India, and I was there for 12 years. The initial organization that I worked with, we were handling work-related injuries. So I was with that organization for about 3 years. And that's probably where I gained a lot of my understanding about persistent pain or chronic pain, as we call it now, and how in our day-to-day life, we inadvertently hurt ourselves or get injured, and how that acute injury progresses to a chronic or a persistent pain that finally overtakes one and changes the way one sees the world. So that was my introduction to the pain world. And once I started work as a physiotherapist, I understood, or like somehow came to the realization that this is something that I do enjoy, and to be able to provide, even if it's for that brief moment, like a respite from pain, that was fulfilling, to put it in perspective, and it was rewarding. And to quote, like as Krishna would say, that the ability to do our work and not expect the rewards thereof, that I could associate with work, and that happened without realizing. And that's where having met you and gaining that insight into coaching, what it actually means, the ability to reflect, the ability to let go, the ability to internalize those values in terms of how do we care, yet not be bound by the care that we provide. That actually transforms certain things, I would say. So to answer your question, what is it that made it memorable in terms of the journey? I would say I always believed, like I started with the initial organization, then I left that organization and I started something of my own, and I was working out of a hospital. And all through there was this thought, this seed that was, I wouldn't say it was a conscious effort, but it just probably took root, and it actually fructified, or like fruition happened in terms of a belief that my work is always in India, and that's what actually helped me there. So I never really had a thought of moving out or going abroad for anything else apart from learning. May that be. So that's probably the two areas where coaching or having met you and those learnings that really helped me to I internalize the feeling that what I believe is that my work is in this particular space and this particular location geographically. But then when we did the exercises, the growth wheel and the life at 65, all of those exercises and the visualizations, it probably made me realize that the world is not what it used to be. It's a much smaller place these days. And in order for you to do what you have to do, you don't have to be bound to any one area, person, or an entity. You could do your work from anywhere in the world. And that was extremely powerful realization. It was kind of a liberation, I would say. So it allowed me to think in certain ways that, okay, I could move. I could do certain things that I thought I could not before. So that was a self-limiting belief that I am happy and proud to say that we could move beyond, which I was able to internalize and think that, okay, so if I had to work and if it could be anywhere, what would I want to do? And it was clear to me that what I want to do the rest of my life is to make pain management accessible to every single person. I mean, the question that I had and still have is, why is pain painful? And I believe that's what is driving me. It seems like an existential question. So how does science tie into it? What would the research part of it look like is what I'm really sorting out with my colleagues at this point. So Ram, to sum up that particular question, I think the changes at every instances where the ability to realize the intangible forces that we believe ourselves to be tied to, make it more tangible in terms of breaking out of those bounds or those limitations, and having the courage to pursue what makes or what sets one's soul free.
Yeah, Hari, specifically, I mean, yeah, I know about the passion for pain management and where the pain comes from. People are getting, they are able to become aware of what the pain is happening for, even in terms of the benefits or whatever it is that they are likely to be cured. But before we get into that, my own experience with you is that when you moved from here, migrated to Canada, the first few months where things were very uncertain for you, the ability with which that you were able to bear that shift, the change, and the willingness for you to do anything that you came your way, not saying that I'm a trained physiotherapist, I'm a doctor and need to do this and so on and so forth, till you found what happened. So there was, as if there was of course a tremendous amount of drive and commitment in terms of what you wanted to do, but also there was a very strong feeling that things will fall in line. There was a belief, there was a faith, there was that kind of a thing, that it's almost as if the universe will take care of me. So can you say a little bit about that? What is it that you experienced at that point in time of this major change in your life?
Sure. Now that I'm reflecting on that, probably I think what really helped me, I would say, is again that belief that things would work out in the end, as you mentioned. Where does that come from? If I have to think back, I mean, growing up as a child, I guess I was not particularly good at studies, I guess, or rather like my interests were not with academics. So I guess it's safe to say that my parents had or I said, very low expectations. So it was easy to live up to that. So I took off from there. And the other aspect of that, growing up, all of these setbacks, there were a lot of setbacks that I had to face. I lost some real good friends early on in my childhood. So grief was an intangible force again with me, and I had no idea about these things. But you learn to overcome certain things, and they become part of your life, and you become um, aware of certain things happening to you at different points in your life. And when you look back, eventually it's a weighing scale. What is it that you really want, and what is it that you have come through based on what your experiences are and what you've the road that you've traveled. uh, it's what you take from them, right? That's my thought, that's my feel that has helped me so far. Just the fact that I was applying for PhD programs in the US and none of them worked out, and the migration process to Canada worked out in 6 months. I chose to see it as, okay, so this is the path that I may have to go through, rather than that's a path that I want to go through. So the I'm really thankful to the coaching practices and all of the lessons that I've learned in a bit, and as well as from those life experiences, where in which you can differentiate your wants from your needs. I don't know if that makes any sense, but for me, uh, when I when I'm faced with crucial situations, dilemmas, that I think about what is it that I really want and what is it that I really need, and how can I find a balance. And I guess the ultimate thought for me would be to take ownership of that, the accountability piece. So if I decide to do something and I choose, and I believe in that factor, that end of the day, we have a choice. In everything that we do, we have a choice. We choose to do something. And if I choose to do something, then it's on me. I have to take that ownership, and I have to take accountability. That responsibility falls within me, and it's not depending on anyone else. And what is it, whatever it's needed to achieve a particular goal, I'm okay with that. So while I was doing my MBA training, or like doing that program with Christ University, so I had left my earlier organization and partnered with a colleague, and we had started up a business. And I had no idea how to set up a company or how to start a wholesale and retail. And of all things, I went into wholesale and retail business during the economic crisis, 2009. And if things could blow out of proportion, that's what it was. But the lessons I learned from that probably helped me to frame myself in a way that any job that you do, there is a lesson that you could take from it. And at any given point in time, wherever you are, you could look for opportunities. Like for me, when there is this flux, like to relate to your point, even COVID, like when this happened right now, things are no longer linear. And when things are no longer linear, I see that there is an opportunity. Like then you don't have to follow the norm. You can mold your future way better than when things are more structured. And I find that as an opportunity, and then try to leverage that, if that answers the question.
All right. So this philosophy that you have, I don't take a linear approach. I'm quite happy to explore what happens as it happens and meet it halfway kind of stuff. So in terms of work that you do today, there are two aspects that I see based on whatever you have told me. One is you as a caregiver, you are working with the person who's in pain, who needs to be rehabilitated. Maybe they are recovering from heart attacks or paralysis or cancer, or whatever it may be now from COVID. You have done all that kind of a work, and you have gained a tremendous reputation in the work that you do from your own colleagues and others as to how well your patients respect you. And the other also, I know from your experiences that the other caregivers of that patient, they have issues that need to be dealt with, and you have had some experiences which are very significant in that area. So, and from what I know, that you adopted some kind of a similar approach in terms of non-linear, which is also a coaching kind of approach. So can you talk a little bit about that, so that people who are coaches, especially if they themselves have people who are victims of whatever illnesses, or if there are people who are caregivers who approach them because of the pain, very often I find that the caregivers have a far greater load coming on them than the patients themselves in some cases. You and I know that several cases this has been experienced. So how do you deal with that? What are your processes, and what would you recommend to people?
Thank you for bringing that up, Ram. So I don't know enough to talk about it. And this is something I was hoping to gain out of this particular interaction. So I would like to throw this out to the everyone who is joining us now. How would anyone define care? I mean, please feel free to share. What does care mean? Name care. Like that's what I'm looking at the intent behind care.
You
Because
want
care,
to put on the chat box
please do.
one word that comes to them as when you talk about care. Okay. So if those in the audience, if you could do that, put on the chat box, I could tell Hari or he can look at it.
Sure,
What does care mean to you?
So personally, let's look at this personally. So my question to you, Ram, is being or like as mortal beings, is it possible for anyone to not care about a person or a thing? I mean, through our lifetime, are we not attached to something, or is it possible for someone to be devoid of care? And what would that look like?
Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm answering your question with another question, but yeah.
The answers that are coming up are care, empathetic connection, compassion, feeling of being connected, wishing or cultivating well-being for another, being there for another, deep love, oneness, tender, mindful attentiveness.
I can see that, Ram. I'm looking at the chat box. Thanks. Yeah.
So your second question to them is, can you visualize yourself or someone else not caring? Is that your question, Hari?
True. Not caring, or has anyone ever felt a moment where you did not care about anything?
Or uncared for.
Or uncared for. Yeah. Acting upon the feeling of compassion. So compassion, like empathy, compassion, love, it seems to be the common theme. So the love comes up again and again. And that, to answer your question, Turam, that's how I would see it, that oneness, it's essentially love, what you feel, and being able to identify that. So now I would like to take this to the other extreme, the other end of the spectrum, where a caregiver might experience burnout, compassion fatigue. We are talking about compassion here. I'm just polarizing this just to get that the sense of the magnitude, the scope of what care could mean or look like. As caregivers in a professional and a personal sphere, to answer your question, Ram, like what I've most often felt in terms of the burden of care is when you actually feel fatigued from compassion, that the primary would be being not able to name the emotion or the trait. Why do we care? I mean, why am I doing this thing? So the question that I would leave with is, why do we do what we do? And that, to an earlier point, is probably what has helped me in articulating coaching, as well as providing compassionate care from a medical or like a work environment, and how I could integrate coaching into that sphere. That ability to co-create with the client or anyone, like whether it be a patient, whether it be a patient's caregiver, whether it be professionals within the team, to be able to co-create that awareness of why am I doing what I'm doing? When I'm providing care to somebody, what is that emotion within me? Love, compassion, that nearness or dearness I feel for this person. And if not, why am I not feeling that? And can we really understand, can we walk that thin line wherein which you do something out of a necessity, out of beliefs, values, and belief systems, and we push ourselves so much that we forget to take care of ourselves as well. So care this is a topic which is so close to my heart. Personally, providing care to my family in terms of being listening to them, physical help, or whichever way that care is needed, as well as professionally, because this is the work that you do. Living with chronic pain is not easy. It's one of the toughest things in the world to do. And caring for someone with chronic pain, it's even more difficult, because there are times as a healthcare professional, you feel helpless. There is nothing you could really do to ease someone's pain. Then it's your job to do that, and then what do you do? So these are the areas that really come up for me, and I honestly do not have answers at some point. So what has helped me is in trying to identify the emotion that I'm feeling at that point. And that, I believe, is where you have helped me a lot. Nirama has helped me a lot. So coaching to me would be really that key in terms of naming the emotion, calling it, tagging it and saying, hey, I am doing this out of this, this, and that. And how can I change if I feel this is a burden, if this is a weight on me, and if I am not taking care of myself, can I provide the same care to the other person? And what are those expectations? Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, it does a lot, Hari. Okay, let me play back what I hear from you. You're talking from the perspective of you being the caregiver, someone being the caregiver. And in that process of extending love, compassion, care, support, and all that stuff, it's very possible that you may get fatigued, which is a compassion fatigue, or whatever other word that people may want to use. And as long as I'm the person who's providing that care as a medical professional or a caregiver, and I'm capable of being aware of where that fatigue is coming from, and if I'm able to put a label to it, and that stands to logic, that does help, or even a feeling in my body where it is coming from, somatics and so on and so forth, you might be able to do it. Which, as someone who's trained in coaching, or most of the people here are, they should be able to do it. But if they are working with someone who's not, then in that case, how do you help them as a caregiver who's probably going through a compassion fatigue in order to rise above that compassion fatigue and be compassionate again?
That's an excellent point, Ram. I mean, that precisely was my question. Do we even know when we have hit that fatigue level? And that would be the coach's job. I mean, for a coach to help someone, the first thing would be to, most often, like that, this has been my experience, that we are not aware that we have hit that. And that's where the values and belief systems are in place, that, hey, it's my family, I'm supposed to do this. And that is what I was leading to in terms of why am I doing what I'm doing? So can a coach really relate to this and see that this is what the person is going through? When someone says, yeah, I have a mother, I have a father, I have a sibling, I have someone that is dear and near to me who is suffering through terminal illness and chronic pain, what does that tell us about that person? So we have our own judgments and biases regarding how this might look based on our personal interactions with our family members. But is that where that other person is standing? So to me, what would strike first is to understand and to be able to stand in that other person's shoes and see what space is that other person at. So it might mean a lot of transference, and how does a coach protect oneself from that is one thing that I may really look into. But identifying where is the client at now, right now. Second, what is the client's value systems and beliefs in terms of what does the client really want? They want to provide care, but how is that ultimately affecting them? So the ask from the client, what is the client really asking? For a coach to really get a sense of that, I think would be the primary. And leading them on that journey would be to identify the value systems and beliefs really in place, which enables the client to provide care and not burn themselves out. Would that answer it?
Yes, surely. If you're able to explore with the client, a couple of questions that are coming up. Suparna is putting down something here saying she feels that it's a gender issue. Women are conditioned to be caring, and that's a burden of being a gender. Would you agree with that? It's that women tend to be more burdened with this than men?
I mean, top of my head, I would just agree. I would just agree that women are more compassionate. It's a very politically loaded question in terms of current scenarios. I do not see any different biases in terms of men or women, the ability of a man or a woman to actually provide care better than one or the other. But nurture versus nature, for sure. Yeah, there is that element, but does that apply to everyone? That's another question, right? So there are a lot of issues with that kind of questioning. But in terms of what does one see in practice, right? So men and women, for me, it doesn't make any difference. I would believe that every single person can do or provide care in their own ways. Ultimately, for me, it's just the values and beliefs. Like, what does a person believe that they are doing, and what do they actually do that in practice? So if someone tells me that women are better at providing care for men, I would agree. Okay, you are. So does that mean men cannot provide care? That's open to debate, right? So, and especially in these times and days where we promote gender neutrality and gender equality, I would not really talk about one being better or one being more adept at doing, because we do, in my workspace, like we see everything. We see men and women equally doing care or equally providing care without or irrespective of the discipline that we are working with.
Yeah, this is what a couple of people have said. Beatrice said, I know males who are deeply compassionate. You and I know experiences of where men have really gone to the deep end, trying to care for their spouses and so on. Sridhar here was putting down his experiences caring for his mother. I know how deeply I'm personally aware of that. So now Sridhar is saying that he was aware of his fatigue level, and after ensuring what was required, he would go out of a break and he would try and re-energize himself. It's absolutely, I've also seen people who tremendously benefit from that. But the question that comes up for me is, when, for whatever reason, maybe they don't have another person to talk to, another person who can create that awareness in them as an external coach or someone, when they reach that level of the fatigue level of compassion fatigue, and they are not able to, for whatever reason, care for that person, then what tends to seem to happen is that there is guilt and shame that happen, which then get into a far more vicious cycle. So are there any experiences that you have? Is there anything that you can think of that would prevent that degenerating into that space?
So yeah, I'm just reading the chats again, and Suparna's just mentioned the conditioning, and I think that's what really stems from, like, men or women, the conditioning that we have. That's what actually caters to the values and belief systems that I'm supposed to do, or I'm supposed to do certain activities, or I'm supposed to care for someone or my entire family, and that really weighs on someone. And when they cannot provide, or when they cannot do those roles, the guilt or those shame which builds in, and which flies under the radar, no one is not even aware of that happening, that probably could actually trigger certain cascade reactions, which ultimately leads to not caring, for the exact opposite of what one started off with. And that's what actually leads to the burnouts. So how does one prevent that? Again, is by checking in. So most often when we get patients, like, one of the main complaints they have is, my family doesn't understand my pain. So what does that understanding mean? What they're really saying is, I do not want to talk to my family about my pain because they are not equipped to handle it. So an answer to that would be education. Like, I mean, when we are in a role, when we are in a situation where you have to provide care, it is upon us to really understand what we are dealing with here. So the cultural biases, the conditionings, the way we are brought up, and what our perception of what should be done and what we actually do could be two different things, very different things. And we may get into the route of, get into those silos of providing day in, day out, this is what I'm supposed to do, so I'm doing it. But what does that do to oneself? That we don't really explore that. And I'm happy to see people saying that, like, I'm aware of my fatigue levels. And when we are aware of ourselves, that happens. And as coaches, I believe we are supposed to be aware of what's happening. But for a common person, does that awareness really sit well, or does it sit high? How often are we thinking of that self-reflection piece? How often are we thinking about our feelings or emotions? The feelings about our feelings, how often do we get into that? So that would be my thought on that. Okay. So how can we promote more of those evocative questioning, or those reflection pieces where we are more aware of what we feel and how we feel about our feelings?
Okay. So if you were to look at it as, let's say, a bit of a triangle where you are the healer, the therapist, doctor, there is a patient, and there are people who are there, the caregivers, or the primary caregiver in the family. Sometimes it may be a spouse, it may be a daughter, it may be a parent, or whoever. So the first thing is, in terms of that patient, to be able to articulate about what is happening to them, and to be able to at least lay down some expectations in terms of what they are looking for. So that is one aspect of it. If that is not being conveyed, then the caregiver doesn't even know what needs to be done. And the second is, the caregiver, as Anabhi pointed out here, and what you're saying is also about that balance between how much you care about the person, at the same time, what is happening to you within. Are you caring for yourself as well? And it could also happen in normal coaching situations. Are we taking care of ourselves when we are listening to other people's emotional problems? It doesn't have to be necessarily in a illness context. So when this happens, when you are dealing with people like this, you talked about some cases where, for instance, there was this young girl who accompanied the mother, and then you had to sort of work with them, and there was some major awareness that happened to you. So can you describe a little bit in terms of that triangle where you're working with two people, the patient and the caregiver, and there was a gap in terms of their communication, and what did you do in such a situation?
Yeah, so that's another spectrum. That's another part of the whole caregiving picture. So I've had multiple experiences now where in which there is this role reversal, where the parent is experiencing severe debilitating pain. They are kind of let's say homebound, and a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old child is basically taking care of the parent. So then for us, like in this medical legal perspective, I mean, that's a potential disaster waiting to happen. So we have to care for the child as well as the parent who is actually undergoing all of these emotions. And for the parent, that child could be the only support system at that point in time. But the way the medical legal system is actually structured, the aid society might step in and they may have to care for the child because the child is basically under abuse. So it falls under that category. So it's an extremely delicate situation that you may have to handle. Honestly, I do not have like a straightforward answer to that. It's case dependent, depending on the circumstances, depending on the awareness, the socioeconomic background. There are a lot of factors that go into a consideration like that. So the root of that would be ultimately what would help to sustain that family together. So we are really looking at the family as a unit and then as the individual pieces of the puzzle. So when we have situations like that, there is individual counseling which goes into both parties, and then to get an awareness of what's actually transpiring and how much of it. Imagine during our formative years when you have to see things that no child should ever see. When those happens, we classify or categorize them under ACE, like adverse childhood events, and that's a major factor in predicting predisposition towards chronic pain later on in life. So those are the values, or like those are the markers that we use to actually determine should an external body or organization step in and provide care in a separate manner, or like an individual counseling, or in a coaching manner, like is it something that's actually doable? So that's an area where we may be bound by ethics, legality, and then the dilemma of what is the right thing to do here. Oftentimes, like I do not have the background to do that sometimes, or I work with a team of professionals. There's a psychiatrist, there's a psychologist, there's a social worker, occupational therapist. Maybe the entire team is, we do not know what to do. So we have to call practice advisors. So an entire series of events are set in motion to actually enable to handle that particular situation. My own experiences has been, I would have to say it was traumatic to see these things happen, but the child or the children, they actually show, or like they come across as traveling through time. They have matured so much that they're no longer children. They're adults. They're adults in those children's body or that physical form, and to be able to communicate with that. For instance, one of the questions, and there was a language barrier with this particular case that you mentioned. So the mother could not really grasp English, and I had to translate through the child, and they would not accept another interpreter due to cultural differences. So the question I had to ask that person was, does this person suffer from cancer? It's a red flag statutory question that you have to ask everyone. And the child told me, I think we should not be asking this person that because they're already in a pain loop. And I thought that is true, probably. Like, so that there are times when we have to take a step back and actually see or witness what's actually transpiring. I do not know if I have an answer to your question, Ram, but at times it's just that ability to take a step back and see what things are for what they really are. And I don't know if that's possible all the time as well.
Yeah, I remember still in this particular case that you said you almost felt that this child was being robbed of its childhood. Those years which would have been joyful, etc., they were completely lost to that person. But seeing it from another perspective, whether it's a child or an adult, so at one level, when you are dealing with the client, especially in a situation like this where, to use a technical word, fibromyalgia or something where the pain doesn't have a specific cause or a definable reason for it, and people are suffering from those kind of things, you need to deal with the patient and also the caregivers who might potentially feel that since it is not being defined, it cannot be defined. So maybe it's not really there. So it is just imaginary. And there could also be that kind of a feeling. So in those kind of situations, what is it that you do in your approach as like a coach-like approach or something in dealing with each of them independently or help them to interact with one another better?
I may have to reflect on that. Can you just repeat the question in one more time, Ram, just to understand?
Yeah, the question is simply this, like, let's take a particular case. I don't know how many of the people in the audience would know this word, fibromyalgia, which is basically pain without a specific cause, or you cannot trace the origin of the pain to a specific reason. But certainly the person is feeling pain. And for an outsider, it might seem as if the person is pretending, it is psychosomatic or malingering or whatever it may be. So that could be potentially be a caregiver as well. So even in terms of that compassion that you are talking about, if someone knows that I'm suffering from pain, that pain is arising from this cancer or this or that, or whatever it is, they will have a greater handle on how I can care for this person or feel compassionate. In this case, they may not. They may think that the person is just pretending. So then you have a job to coach the patient, you have a job to coach the caregiver, and between the two, establish a connection. That also becomes your role. So what happens in such a case? Maybe hypothetical, but how would you look at it?
It's not hypothetical, that's reality. This is the everyday. This is basically what happens with us every single day. So like I mentioned earlier, this is one of the primary complaints that people have, that nobody understands my pain. So the people that come through our doors here are people who have been from pillar to post, seen all the specialists, and they have tons of imaging, they've got everything done, but they haven't recovered from the pain, and the pain is debilitating. So chronic or persistent pain, as we put it, it's a malefic force. It just debilitates you. And right now, thankfully, like 10 years back, when I was talking to you, like when I was actually delving deeper into this, we were struggling. We were really struggling to have evidence for this kind of pain, or like how to actually articulate this pain. But thankfully, over the past decade, there's a lot of work that has been done research-wise, and there's a lot more evidence. So for anyone who's out there in the audience, if they want to learn more about this, Dr. Lorimer Mosley, he's an Australian pain scientist. There is a short YouTube video clip. It's called Tame the Beast. So if you Google Tame the Beast, and it's an organization now, tamethebeast.org, or like there's a short video clip. So we usually play that video during our pain education session groups. So we have extensive pain education groups, and that's where I have tried to integrate the coaching approach in terms of what we do. Initially, the program was more of didactics, like we were teaching people. So now this is the first iteration that we are running of our comprehensive pain university program, in which the last session is going to be more of a self-reflective piece. So that's the approach that I'm trying to take with our patients and caregivers. One, to actually validate. It's extremely important to understand the nature of the pain, which is what I meant by the education piece. The pain that people experience is real. And that's the first thought. When someone complains of pain, it's upon us as healthcare professionals to believe that pain. But when a family member or someone who doesn't understand the condition, it's natural. It's viable to feel that this is not a real thing and this person is malingering or imagining or is a hypochondriac. It's extremely easy to label the person or the pain. And once you label and that label sticks, and that in itself is a perpetuating factor for pain. So the first thing would be to validate that pain. And that happens both ways. As a coach, as a caregiver, as a healthcare professional, it's important to understand that both are part of the whole. So we have to address the family member or the caregiver as well as the patient, educating them on both at different levels. The patient needs validation that their pain is real and that there is at least a system in place by which an acute pain becomes a chronic pain. And thankfully, we have evidence. We know science has caught up and we understand how this happens, even though we do not know why certain people get affected. That's the most recent research going on. Why does some people get affected with this pain and why some not? So that's the other piece that we talk to the family member about. This is still an unexplained area. We are still learning, all of us together in this, and bringing that whole piece together at the end. Understanding the pain, that's primary. Understanding the nature, scope, breadth, and the etiology of the pain. When did this happen? That would be one. And why does it affect the way it does? So that would be more for the caregiver perspective. To actually tie this together, that it's very different. Like, it's very difficult to say if a person has secondary gains and if that's a reason that the person is playing it. So that's extremely difficult to say. But from a therapeutic point of view, we do have that ownership to believe the person and then find if there is a solid reason for the family member to feel that way. So it's a long-term process in terms of understanding why this particular disconnect happened between the patient and the caregiver. And if so, what would be the primary or the more easier or the accessible road to change the belief systems?
Okay, something that comes up for me is on the one hand, if that pain, like fibromyalgia, for example, is not really physical in the sense it's not coming from a particular location that you can identify, and people cannot treat it in that manner.
Actually, we can, in the sense, sorry to interrupt, like in terms of, it's more, it's neurophysiological. So it's these days, we understand more, it's more from, so it's more of a stress response. It's our entire central nervous system which gets sensitized. So it's a central nervous system sensitization pathway. So basically, we call it nociplastic. It used to be called sensitization before, but the latest term is nociplastic. Noci essentially meaning noxious, origin from the Latin Greek word. Noxious basically mean painful. Plastic, it could be molded. Basically, a pain which actually travels or it molds itself based on the external factors. The changes that really happen are actually in the brain. So it's neurophysiological. So sometimes it's immunological as well. So the entire spectrum that we deal with is neuro, psycho, immunological. So it's an entire spectrum. Basically what determines, and you could tie that really well with the chakra philosophy that we have, right? I mean, your glands, it's basically glandular. So you may not have one area to pinpoint, and that's really what works for these kind of people. You have a widespread pain, which does not have a single specific local or a foci of origin, but what you have is widespread pain. So you treat it from either with a top-down approach or from a bottom-up approach. When we say top-down, you basically mean from a mind to body, consciousness mind to body, or like from the physical standpoint. Through exercises, you regulate the mental health or well-being. With that, you go into the consciousness. So it's the memory centers, our emotional centers, the amygdala, the hippocampus, and all of the pituitary glands. Basically, that's the area where these changes happen. And with fMRIs, functional MRIs, we have been able to map certain areas.
So here there is a specific question. Kaushik says that my wife suffers from fibromyalgia and I'm helpless. Medication doesn't help. So is there something that he can be more aware of or she can be more aware of that might help?
So I would suggest like there is a site, Pain BC, like PAIN BC, British Columbia. Pain BC would be, that would be a good site to start with, or our website, tapme.ca, tapmepain.ca. These two are like, I'm just going to try and type that in. So these are good resources to start with. Tapme Pain. These are good resources to actually read through to understand what exactly the nature of pain is. And there's a lot of resources out there. which would actually explain this. But then for fibro, it's not one thing that might help, so finding a good specialist would be key, and then integrating treatments. So there are alternative therapies, there are different substratas of treatment that could actually help. Medications alone may not help, which we really understand now. And part of our job is to take people away from medications here, and meditation, mindfulness with physical exercises, and all of those treatment spectrum, you have to address it at those multiple levels. It's not just a somatic pain, it's not just physical. When we diagnose fibromyalgia, it's basically what it means is it's traveled above and beyond the normal level of a referred pain, if that makes sense. I mean, to simplify that, what it means is any pain without a real source of origin that you can trace to an acute or a specific injury, then it basically means your nervous system has really blown up. So imagine like your burglar alarm or a smoke alarm or a car alarm. It should beep only when there is a threat, or when someone's trying to break in, or when there is a fire. If you are toasting bread and if the alarm goes off, that's what's happening with us. A pain, like that was my initial question. Why is pain painful? Pain could be anything, right? I mean, why is not pain a pleasurable sensation? Well, it isn't, because unless you have painful, or unless you have that noxious sensation that is not really pleasant, we don't question. Would we ever question anything if we are happy? No, we go to a church, we go to we pray when we are in pain. We really do not pray if you're happy. And that's that simple thing. That's a simple change, or that shift that happens, which asks us to examine or look within. And with chronic pain, usually what happens is we are either in two of those modes. There are two kind of nervous systems, the sympathetic or the parasympathetic. One basically helps us fight danger, the flight, fight, or freeze responses. The second, rest and digestion. So the more we are in pain, the more we are aligned to the stress responses. How do we switch from one to the other? So these are avenues that we can explore, and what did not work for now, maybe later on it could change, but it's just a start. So identifying what gives us relief, and then tackle it through the mind or through the body. But right now, what we know for sure is there are different approaches which could eventually work. And one thing that we really find sets us back is because we need immediate results. And again, like that, the inability for our, as human beings, for us to actually envision long-term, I would say, or rather, we do not do well with infinites. When you don't even know where the pain's coming from, when you don't even know when it's going to end, it's not really difficult to deal with, or easy to deal with, I'm sorry. So that, I mean, acceptance and commitment therapy is one part of it as well. So there are a lot of things that I'm throwing out there, but just simplify this and answer the question, I would say understanding the condition better, understanding oneself better, understanding the values and belief systems that is driving us currently, that would be key. And maybe finding a treatment option or solution which we could sustain for a period of time. Understand that this is not going to go away overnight. There is no magic pill, there is no fix that we have so far uncovered, but with persistent and consistent practice, we can rewire the nervous system. And that's the good news. The good news is that neuroplasticity happens. You can rewire the brain or the nervous system so that what's painful today need not be painful tomorrow. With most often fibro people, movement, the brain has learned or adapted that movement equals pain. And that may be the area we need to change. There is low energy. Chronic fatigue syndrome is another part which is tied to it. They go hand in hand. So finding those areas of what our capabilities, what can we do really well now, and keeping it low and slow would be a solution, if not a cure.
Hari, one of the questions that Kaushik is asking, though, of course, that is not really the topic of discussion, is there anybody in India that you know of who's working on fibromyalgia cures?
At this point, I do not have anything that I can just give out. If I'm recommending something, I would need to know. But my earlier organization that I was with, that could be a source. I mean, that's where I started off, which is in Bangalore. So RECOUP, could be like an organization you can start with, though I haven't had contact like a long time since.
Recoup, RECOUP.
Yeah, Recoup.
Okay.
.org. I'm assuming, please do not quote me on this. Yeah, Recoup.
What's the name of the doctor you said?
Dr. Deepak Sharan.
Deepak Charan. Okay.
Yeah, Dr. Deepak Sharan. So yeah, most of my learning started with that. But again, I haven't had like contact in a long time now.
Okay,
But
going to something else, the shortage of time. Quick question. When you said that calming helps, the parasympathetic, therefore, any breathing exercise, meditation, which excites the parasympathetic part of it, which is the polyvagal system, the left side of the body, calming the right side of the brain or something like that. So even like pranayama, breathing through the left nostril, are they things which might potentially help, even if they are not fully scientifically evidenced?
there is evidence. There's a lot of evidence these days. But yeah, I mean, for me, like, I mean, if it's a pain condition that we're really looking at, I mean, just regulating breath without even going into the specifics of right or left, just deep breaths. That's what really happens. When you take a deep breath, then the focus actually shifts from that. So when that's the way we are geared. So for, I mean, I would not want to do this as an exercise. We would gently do it, but just that, try not to mimic me, but just doing that rapid breath, that actually triggers our stress responses. As opposed to just taking a deep breath, it actually calms it down. It's that simple. And that's the physiological responses as human beings that is innate, and that's evolutionary. So there is evidence to that.
So
but
deep breathing, extended, slow, rather than hyperventilating is a way to calm down.
Absolutely. If you would just do that, if you do that hyperventilating, fast-paced breath, apical breathing, you can immediately feel, like most people will feel, that anxiety state.
Yeah.
As opposed to, so it can actually trigger the anxiety responses, which is my point.
Hari, the last question, because we are almost on top of the hour. We talked about the ethical situation, which is very true in coaching as well, because there is reams and pages of what is described as code of ethics by various organizations. And these are about the legal aspect of it. We talked about it. Like, for example, if the patient were to tell you something which potentially could harm that person and so on, you need to report it, in spite of the fact that may further deteriorate the situation of the patient. So what is your thinking on this? I know there may not be a solution because there is a legal issue. But if you are not, for example, not governed by the legal issue, what is your take on this?
I'm still debating that one, Ram. So I don't really have, and because this is an ongoing conversation now. So we are pulling in our practice advisors. It actually puts us in a sticky spot. So the patient actually trusts you and tells you something, but the solution to that right now, what we are being advised is that we should have that disclaimer stating that if a patient discloses something, there is the limits of confidentiality, and that is probably where the ethicality or the ethics would stand in. So without disclosing or without informing the patient, that it puts us in a sticky spot. So I understand your question is different. So I'm still trying to navigate that path. There is black. So with chronic pain, what we're doing is there's a lot of grays. There is black and there's white, and then there's a lot of grays, and we are always in the gray areas, gray zones. So we're trying to define that a little better. But at this point, we are being told that we should always disclose this to the patient initially during the first consult, that whatever they may say, if it actually breaches the limits of confidentiality, and the limits of confidentiality is that either they are at harm or they intend to harm someone else, and we have reasonable doubt or reasonable enough cause to believe that this is going to happen, or a child is involved. These three things, I mean, we just have to mention initially or in the beginning that if they disclose something, then we have a responsibility. It's our duty to report that. So which to me, yeah, that is logic. So that is so that's a piece. As physical therapists, we are not trained to do this, but this is a spectrum that we might actually move into as the scope of the breath, because you do not see this. Patients do not disclose such sensitive information when you're in a sports clinic, right? They come to treat an ankle injury, a foot injury, a leg injury. You don't tend to hear this, but with persistent pain, this is something that, because that's a question again, it's pain. People are in pain, and all of us want some relief, right? I mean, we are all looking for some respite. And that's again the question, why is pain painful? So my thought is now again, I would like to think, like from an ethical standpoint, I would like to think, why is this person's pain painful? Where is that pain stemming from? And evaluate based on those needs. In an ideal world, in an utopia, that's what I would think. as a healthcare professional within my scope of practice, is it really advisable for me to understand where that pain is coming from for this person, and at this point, what would benefit the person the best? It's client-centric care that we are really looking at. And if that goes beyond that particular area, if I feel that they are at a risk for harming themselves, then of course, we may have to breach that confidentiality agreement.
Okay, I mean, it's a huge subject by itself. I just wanted to throw it in there and to have that. So Hari, thanks, thank you very, very, very much. It's been a tremendously enlightening conversation. Magda, are you going to put up the password? I think you said it is pencils or something, isn't it? Is that what you said, or I don't know?
I didn't set it up this week, but yes, I remember. I believe it's pencils. But yes,
okay.
same place as usual. So learn.coacharia.com, and yes, it's pencils.
Yeah. Okay. So my memory is not bad. Too bad. Anyway.
Nope, not in this particular case.
Not in this particular case.
Okay.
Okay, guys. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Hari. And
thank you, everyone.
You want them to ask whose headband is the whatever the goal is?
No, we already established that it was mine. It's okay.
There's no checkout. That
yeah, I know. Like, it's no longer a competition, right? It never was anyway. Yeah. So Magda, you win.
For you, for me, everything's a competition, and I won.
Okay.
You won.
So thank you, Hari. Thank you for
thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Session. It's not a very easy session to combine two completely different fields of therapy, or like a medical therapy as well as this, but just to give an idea about what do you do as a caregiver, because it's very often I find that being a caregiver is a much more difficult space than even the victim in terms of the load that it puts on you. Thanks a lot. Take care.
Thank you.